Good morning. It is 3:15 and I am done. I'll be honest with you, I'm fairly shocked myself. For the last 2 nights, in basically my lunch break and, just before work, I thought I'll knuckle down and get as much done as I can, and it's done. Now, I know it doesn't look particularly pretty, and full disclosure, none of my builds look particularly pretty, but this is the best looking out of all of them. So even though it's kind of ugly inside, it functions, it's solid, it works, and I'm kind of happy with it. All right, what I'm going to do is very, very quickly break down everything that I've done and everything that I've needed to sort of modify and adapt to get this, for the sake of, better wordage, a collector's figurine that specifically says not an electronic device on the box, to get it into a working electronic device. The buttons and the switches and whatnot, some of them were stickers, some of them were just novelty, like didn't have any function at all. And I've turned it all into a working device, a working electronic device. Now, when I designed this, I said I wanted to do it in 2 parts. And I think I brought it up. I can't remember if it was in my first or second video that I made on this, but whatever one it was, I'm going to put it up here in the corner, up there. I said that I kind of want to build it in 2 parts, and here's what I want to do, and here's the switches and whatnot. And that's exactly what I've done. I've built it in 2 sections. So the upper and the lower are attached by these little jumper cables. The only thing that you have to do to separate the upper and the lower is 3 screws into the main chassis and 3 screws here on the SD card reader. That's it. There's no desoldering, there's no clipping wires, there's nothing. Everything can be taken apart, and the reason for that is if something shorts or something breaks or I want to replace something, or for whatever reason, all I have to do is undo these jumper wires and then just the top half comes clean away. Right, let's quickly go into the lower half. So the lower half, pretty standard. Again, all of this is based on a template, and the template was the PlayStation Legacy. So the insides, exactly the same, just a different configuration. So, looking at this, we have 2 micro USBs, and they have been directly soldered into where the stacked USB type A's were. I've also taken off the Ethernet port as well because I didn't need it. Where the stacked USB type A's were. And what I've done is I've just literally stripped 2 cables, like standard micro USB extender cables that you would get anywhere, like super cheap, stripped them and then just soldered it in and then taped it down. That's it. Super, super simple. The ends I cut because it was a little sticker that sort of replicated the 9-pin old Megadrive ports. They were roughly about the same size as a micro USB. So all I did was I sort of hand drilled in with a tri-blade sort of scalpel into there, cut it all out, cleaned it up a little bit with some with a razor blade, and then just hot glued them in. Really, really simple. What else have we got? We've got a little 5-volt fan which goes directly into the 5-volt rail here. This, you'll see where this goes in a minute, but it goes directly into the 5-volt rail, and then I cut a hole in the bottom just for the little fan, exactly the same as the PlayStation Legacy. Don't really need it, but if I'm doing a lot of I'm going to be doing a lot of programming and transference, so it's going to be using the wireless, which makes it get a little hot. Plus the Sega CD stuff can also heat it up a little bit. So this is just to keep it nice and cool. Mostly when I'm doing the wireless stuff, because I'm going to be transferring a large amount of files over. So that's that. Again, don't really need it, but why not? And the last thing is this ribbon cable, which goes to this SD card. Now, all I've done with this is exactly the same piece of cardboard. All I've done is I've painted it black. Sorry, not paint. I've Sharpied it black. And the reason is I didn't want, when you put the cartridge in and out, you to see the gnarly white cardboard there. So I thought the black would just look a little bit more, aesthetically pleasing. And the only other thing I've done is I have hot glued this. Now this I got the idea when I was making the Wild Pie, when I had to make a guitar neck for a pie, essentially. And I was like, I need something that's non-conductive, can be easily shaped, and works well with super glue and hot glue. And the one thing, and I also need it to be either cheap or free. And what did I come up with? Well, it's really, really simple. Sporks. Like, you can get these at Starbucks. We've got a cafe here, and we've got loads of them. And, well, these ones are knives. So I guess it's spives. Anyway, it doesn't matter. What you do is you can glue it, shape it, cut it, do whatever you want with it. It's non-conductive, works really well with super glue, works really well with hot glue, and kind of stays where you put it. Super, super, super good to model with, prototype with, you know, craft with, and basically free. Right, so what I've done is I've hot glued 2 little pieces on there, which makes the SD card stand upright, because obviously the cartridge has to fit nicely over the top of that. And that's it. That's the entire lower done. The only other thing I've done, like I said, when I cut out the micro USB ports at the front, and obviously the hole for the fan, cut out 2 ports for the back. One for the power, one for the HDMI. Now the rest of this I could, because on the original Megadrive the power was here and the video out was here, I could have moved these with an extender cable over here, which I did with the PlayStation Legacy, but it was an utter nightmare, and I did not want to do that again. So all I did was think, you know what, no one's going to see it, it's the back, I'll just put them over here, and that's what I did. That's the entire lower, super simple. Let's get that out of the way. Now the upper. This is where it looks complicated, but it really isn't. If you've ever done like a science project in school, it's no more complicated than this. Basically, again, non-conductive materials, sporks. All right, so we've got piece of wood here, piece of wood here, piece of wood here. Again, I'm going to put it in the corner up here, but I can't remember what video it was. One of the videos I said, oh, what I'm going to do is get this little slidey switch, and I'm going to make it here and add a little piece of cardboard where I was prototyping. Pretty much everything that I prototyped worked out. But I'm using wood instead of cardboard. That's the only difference. And I had all these grand plans for micro switches, and for the most part, it worked out exactly as planned, which is, you know, fairly serendipitous. So I'm going to break down each bit. There's only 4 sort of main parts on here, so I'm going to break it all down. Again, all of this follows the same concept as the PlayStation Legacy, only the configuration is different. That's it. So starting over here with this little white section over here, this is the LED. Now the LED is here, it's flush, it's basically a drive light, hooks straight into the GPIO. Every time you access the SD card, this flashes. Again, same with the PlayStation Legacy. The only difference is this time it's red, because the Megadrive had a little red LED. Now these LEDs are for video screens, which is why it's got a really tall stem there. So what I did was I took about 4mm off the top of the stem here, cut it, filed it, made it nice and smooth, and then that sits flush in here. And all I've done, again, just a little bit of hot glue, tidy up all the cabling, and that goes straight into the GPIO pins. Nothing, you know, fancy there at all. It's literally just an LED. Getting down here is where it gets a little bit more complicated. I'm going to start on, where should I start? I'll start here. Now, I had a piece of cardboard on here before, and I was like, these are novelty switches and buttons. Like, that wasn't even a button. It was just a sticker here. And this didn't do anything. It was just a sliding, just a little sliding, what used to be the volume knob on the original Megadrive. But then what I thought was, well, maybe I can connect a switch behind it. And that's exactly what I've done. So what I've got here is a 2-stage switch. So if I use this screwdriver, you'll hear it click. So it goes in, that's on, that's off. So I thought, well, I can use that. If I connect something to the base of this switch, which in this case, a little piece of balsa wood from a spork. Oops, let's try and hold it still. Off. Oh my goodness. On, off, on, off, on, off. And all that's doing is just sliding and touching that. So this is connected to the fan. So every time you want to turn the fan on, all you got to do is slide it to maximum volume, clicks on, and again, clicks off. I have left more balsa wood down here, so I can put another micro switch here if I wanted to. So when it comes, you can also push it all the way down and click it into a switch. But I haven't put anything there yet because I've got nothing. Well, I had plans for it, but they kind of fell through. So, and I'll explain that in a minute. But yeah, so if you want to turn the fan on, slide the volume slider all the way up to the top, just hits that. Again, nothing too complicated. The only difference is, what I've done is I've made a little hot swap connector here. So I've soldered this wire to a pin, and that pin goes onto here. It's just the ground cable, and you slide it in. I didn't want something that I had to cut or disconnect or do anything with that. So if I ever want to take the upper off the lower, all I've got to do is slide out, let's try and get it in focus, slide out that little pin from that little receiver. That's it. And again, all it is the ground, which is why I didn't want the hot swap connector down here, because it will jiggle and whatnot. If I just put it on the end of this cable, it can all tuck neatly down there, and that can be hot glued in. It's all nice and tidy. Right, these last two are fairly complicated. The switch here, this is the power switch. Now, on the other side, you'll see, again, this was a little novelty switch, didn't actually do anything. There was just a nub on the other side. And you can hear, now, it's connected to something. What it was connected to is one of these. Now, I had this idea where I would run the nub over this little wheel. And every time it goes over the little wheel, it touches this little tiny little red trigger down here, and that's the micro switch. Now, the only problem was I didn't have enough room inside there. So I thought, why won't I mount it sideways? So the nub will run this way along the wheel. Doesn't really matter because the little nub is round. Only problem with that is that the nub is so small, it was going into the on position and then stopping. Like, this wheel was too big for the nub to go all the way over, combined with the smallness of this switch. Like, that switch is so small, it wouldn't go over. So what I did was I actually pulled this wheel off, and what you're left with is just the micro switch itself. So that wheel sits in that little slot there, that little sort of springy mechanical metal bit. That comes out, and what you're left with is this tiny little red switch. So what I did was I mounted it just on the left. So if you say that this is the nub, like the nub is just on one side, and you drag the nub over with the switch, and as you drag the nub over, it actually clicks down on that little red trigger. Now, the way to get that set up, again, is just with sporks. You just cut this wood and hot glue it in. So all I've done is, instead of hot gluing the switch to the plastic, what I've done is I've just made little wooden, basically guide rails. So the switch will be in the same spot all the time, and then you just glue the guide rail to the switch. That stops any glue getting in the micro switch. It stops it getting jammed up. It stops it moving as you're holding the glue. It's perfect. So now what will happen is, you can't see in there because there's no light, but what I'm doing is I'm moving the little switch, and you can just, in fact, you can almost just see it moving inside there. It's just below that little red piece of electrical tape. But all it does is, as you move this switch across, it runs over this tiny little red trigger and sits nicely on the other side. Because the nub is so small, it actually does cross over the whole thing and sit on the other side. What that does is it runs a startup, safe shutdown script. That's it. So you don't want it to be constantly sat on, because as soon as the machine turns on, it will register that it's touching and then instantly shut itself down. No good. Because of this, and I didn't want to put in two switches, because of this, that solves that issue, because as you drag it over, that runs the script, and then when you're done, drag it over, runs the same script. Easy peasy, nothing complicated, but it was just a nightmare because I'm working in incredibly small, conditions down here. Now, this last one, this is where it gets sort of a bit, bit homebrewy. What I decided to do was, and again, I mentioned it in that previous video, was that because this was just a sticker and I wanted a reset button here, what I decided to do was buy an old, I think they're called Stadler rubbers, like erasers that you used to have in school. And what I was going to do was cut it into the shape of a button. But to get a micro switch to work, what I did was I bought these micro switches here, these tiny, tiny little micro switches. And what I was going to do was cut a little slot into the eraser and feed this in. And then what you could do is push down on top of the eraser and Click, 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 click. So how did I do it? Well, I've glued this in, and you can't really see it. But if you look there, you can see that wire goes down into that micro switch, which is just cut into a small slot into the pencil eraser. I actually have made this because I realized that I wouldn't be able to tell people how it worked once I've glued it in because it's too small. But this is basically how it works. The pencil eraser has a micro switch just basically sunk into it, and both the wires come off the side. All you're doing is completing a circuit. It carries no voltage. So because of that, you just go, and it's that simple. You're just literally pressing down on the rubber's hitting the micro switch, and that sends the signal. That's it. Easy peasy, but again, working in such a confined small space made it really difficult. But you can see there's one wire on that side, and there's the little black wire on that side, and all you're doing is just pressing down on the little gummy rubber and hitting that. So we've got a 2-stage button up here, a micro switch here, a reset button there, and your power LED here. And that's basically it. That's your entire upper. Now, I did have one other thing that I wanted to do, which is why I thought about putting a micro switch here. Another one of the, where are they? Where did I put them? Another one of these ones, these tiny little micro switches here, and I have left room for it here. What I bought was, I bought a bunch of these. Now these are 3.5mm audio jacks. It's actually cheaper to buy 10 than it is 1 because, you know, China. So I have one here, and what I wanted to do was mount it in here, because on the original Megadrive there was a headphone socket here. And what I wanted to do was that when you slid it down to the bottom section, or to the bottom thing, you would hit a micro switch, and then audio would stop coming out of the HDMI, and it would actually come out the headphone jack so you could use headphones. Unfortunately, there's just no room in there. I mean, I could cut this end down. The reason this one sticks up slightly longer is so I could actually have something to hold while I was hot gluing it. I could cut that down and then lay it on top of that. The only problem is that on the original scale Megadrive, which was, I mean, this is a 1 to 2.3, so it's almost 2.5 times the size of this, the original one. And that is exactly the same as the original one. So it would look really weird, like the scaling would be off. I mean, that little, you can see half of it there because it's on the seam. That's half of what the, you know, 1 to 2.3 scale would be. It's tiny. And if I put that in it for a standard set of headphones, it will look really weird. So I could add it later. I mean, I could shave it all down. I could shave this side down. I could cut that down and add it in later. But I'm still not sure about it. I think it would look weird. At the moment, it's, you know, scaled perfectly. So yeah, I mean, that's basically it. All you do is you just click, you just insert these DuPont cables onto the GPIO, screw it all together. What I'm going to do now is very, very, very quickly put it all back together, hook it up to the computer, and it's still running the PlayStation Legacy SD card. And the reason it's doing that is because the Sega Megadrive stroke, whatever I end up calling this, the Sega, what did I call it? The Sega Megapive, that's it. The Sega Megapive. The SD image that I'm doing for that, I've done maybe like an hour's work on it. It's very, very basic. But because the PlayStation Legacy is finished and the configuration is exactly the same, I'm just using that image here to test all the lights and the switches and, you know, the sliders and whatnot. Because without it, the only thing that will work is the volume one. So what I'm going to do now is very, 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 very quickly pause, run into the other room, hook it up to the PC, and let's show you this thing running. Okay, so now we're all hooked up. We have the PlayStation Legacy SD card in there at the minute, purely because, again, like I said, inside everything is hooked up to the same GPIO pins, so you can essentially hot swap between this and the PlayStation Legacy SD card and everything will work. I haven't done the Sega Megapive SD image yet, so none of the switches will work. It's only got a few ROMs on there, so on and so forth. So that's why I'm using it. Inside, you can see why I sharpied that in black. It's just a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. Right, first thing I'm going to do is turn on the fan. Should be able to just hear it inside. Okay, now I'm not really need it right now. Only really need it when I'm adding stuff via Wi-Fi or whether I'm playing a game online. That's when it will get pretty hot. Let's do the on switch. Now I've got big chunky fingers and these are really, really small. This whole unit is smaller than the Megadrive Mini that they're actually selling. So because it's a lot smaller, I'm going to try with my big chunky fingers to do this and be in frame at the same time. So now I've clicked it to on. The unit will come on, the drive light will start flashing, and will instantly load into the PlayStation Legacy image. There you go. So again, this is just for testing purposes. That's the only reason I'm using it. Let me just switch on this controller. There we go. So as you can see, drive light working, fan working, startup script button working, everything's working. The only thing to test is the rubber button here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the front end, start any game, it doesn't really matter what game, and then press the reset button, and it should take us back to an emulation station. Like I said, if anything's short or I want to redo anything, there are 3 screws in the chassis and 3 screws holding in the SD card reader. That's it. Everything else is completely, essentially, plug and play. Right, let me just start a game by pressing X on here. And we're just going to be loading into, I think it's 007 Racing, I'm not sure. I didn't actually take a look. Okay, so we're in. Okay, and it's loaded. Right, so what I'm going to do now, again, really big fingers, really small button. I'm just going to press this. Oh, it's quite hard, and back to emulation station. So again, that reset button is exactly the same as the disk open button on the PlayStation Legacy. All it is just a different configuration. So now, again, with my big fingers, I'm just going to switch this to the off position, and off. Shutting down, all done. So yeah, it works. I should never really need to open it up again, fingers crossed, touch wood. But now I guess we just start doing the image. So yeah, I'm super pleased right now with the way this turned out. I've taken this 1 to 2.3 scale model of a Sega Megadrive, which was, for want of a better term, you know, a collector's edition figurine. And this again, down here, Sega Megadrive, games console #1, retro electro. It's just literally a scale model, that's all it is. And I've managed to turn it into a functioning, not only Megadrive, but Master System, Game Gear, 32X, Sega SG-1000, Sega CD, the lot, essentially. So all that's left to do now is the image. I've started it, I'm going to finish it, and then hopefully, the Sega Megapive will be my my go-to Sega machine. Just like my PlayStation Legacy is my go-to PS1 machine. There is just one thing I have left to do with this right now. Yeah, let's just get rid of that. Like that. Perfect. Alright, cool. Peace.